When I was a boy and played with the gang, we did a lot of things. We roasted potatoes and went on expeditions. We tipped over garbage cans now and then. We wrote nasty remarks about the teacher on the sidewalk. But we never spent an afternoon sitting around like this, reading. What a wonderful thing this would be if they were reading something worthwhile, something that would stimulate their desires to build and to grow. But they're not reading anything constructive. They're reading stories devoted to adultery, to sexual perversion, to horror, to the most despicable of crimes. The corpse that came to dinner.
What a frightening thought, gathering around in the woods reading comic books. Anyway, here is TCJ's Top 100 Comics of the 20th Century. I learned that the comic journal just goes by TCJ, and here's its representation of the Golden Age. I basically scanned through, and here's what I found. First of all, I want to go over my quest for access. So this is the comic journal access that I have through UFC. As you can see, there are lots of years. It goes from basically the beginning to current date, but it does skip a few years in the middle there, specifically 1998 and 1999, and I needed the year 1999. Yeah, I'm showing you there that I don't have it, and I emailed the library about it, and unfortunately I did not get access to it, so it made this presentation a little more complicated for sure. But after I didn't have access to that, my next thought was to go to the website. So I went to the TCJ archives, and I found that in order to get access to this, I had to become a TCJ subscriber. And I signed up for multiple accounts because I was willing to become a subscriber to get access to this, but I did not figure out how to get on there. I don't think the website's been updated in a while, but I was willing to give them my money. But it doesn't matter. In the end, I made it work, but I thought maybe Amazon. Definitely not Amazon, because $768.57 or $884.44 just does not sound practical right now. So unfortunately, I had to drop that, and I just had to accept defeat. I use these two lists religiously. The first one's just like Lixer.com. I have no idea what that is. And then list challenges, I also have no idea what that is, but I use them to find all of the list information out. And yeah, here's my criteria. It has to be an American comic from the Golden Age or from the years 1938 to 1956. And I excluded all comic strips just to make it a little simpler. And I also didn't want any like illustrator art collections, because there were some from like some New Yorker artists. I just didn't find that to be the most relevant to what I was looking for. So that's basically all the criteria, and let's get into it. So I'm going from the bottom up. Number 94 on their list is Space Hawk by Basil Wolverton. And I should clarify right away that everything that I have in the text block is a direct source, a direct quote from a source, ideally from TCJ. But if I couldn't get access to TCJ's review of individual comics, I just use a different source, and I will clarify. But most of the time it's from TCJ themselves, because they did review most of these comics individually without not just on the list. But Space Hawk seems like a super vibrant, interesting comic. It seems to use a lot of like grotesque drawings of like extraterrestrial creatures, which I think is super innovative for the time. It only ran a couple years, from 1940 to 1942. It was pretty creepy, and I would say quite innovative for going to space travel. Like, for how early it came out, you can already see that they're on a different planet, on like wearing this spacesuit-esque thing. Yeah, I think it was pretty ahead of its time, and it seems like a pretty interesting, loud, bright comic that would have caught the eye of a lot of kids in the 40s here. The next comic is number 85 on their list. It takes a complete opposite toll, and it is the Willie and Joe cartoons of Bill Mauldin. He was a young cartoon artist, from my understanding, and then he got drafted into the war. And seeing all of that just, I think, completely changed his life. And in turn, he made realistic depictions of really what was going on the battlefield. Willie and Joe weren't upbeat, apple-cheeked GIs who were rah-rah about seeing action. They were grizzled, beaten down, exhausted workers who were there to do a highly unpleasant job in the best way they knew how. As men who were fighting and dying on a basis, they resented those who put them in harm's way while staying out of the fray. I really respect this for going against the war propaganda like this one. Captain Marvel, number 79 by C.C. Beck. This one kind of surprised me just because it seems so classic. Like, I wouldn't have pointed this out of all the other ones we studied this semester, all the other superheroes, but like with its racialized slurs and depictions on the bottom there, but it seems to have some stuff going for it, like it's Billy, the protagonist, so kids can identify with him pretty easily. It seems like maybe he doesn't take himself too seriously, which is fun. I don't know. It seems, and again, bright and colorful. And then we take a turn again, number 76, Master Race by Bernie Krigstein and Al Feldstein. You know, he devoted a whole lecture on Master Race, deservingly so. It is a brilliant and insane comic. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a review by the TCJ, so I had to go to Comics just to get a little synopsis on what people think about Master Race in general. And I saw in multiple sources that they call it the Citizen Kane of comic books, which is a pretty high standard from my understanding. And I mean, I don't think there's too much I can even say about this one. I definitely think it deserves to be on this list. Why it's not a little higher, maybe that's what I don't know. But obviously these guys have a different understanding of comics than I do. And then up at number 63, we have Hey Look by Harvey Kurtzman. Not our first time seeing Kurtzman on that, or it is our first time. It is not our last time seeing Kurtzman on that list. I think this little side comic, I believe it was In Between Stories, is super fun and unique, and it breaks that third wall quite literally, especially in that last panel there. I think this really showed his creativity. The how no longer matters because the effect has done something to our minds that is far more profound, flipping our perceptions inside out like the stacked cubes in an optical illusion. That's what TCJ had to say about Hey Look and Harvey Kurtzman in general. He's a very highly celebrated guy. Up a few spots higher, we have number 59 with Little Lulu by John Stanley. I wasn't expecting to see this one either, but it does make sense when I think about it. There were not a lot of comics for girls, so I feel like this fulfilled a spot that was missing in the market. And it seems like she was a super fun character to follow in all of her mishaps and adventures. And the way that the TCJ puts it is that Stanley's genius here was twofold. By conjuring a rambling and realistic comic book world for Lulu and her gang to occupy, he created a perfect canvas for his signature concoction of chaos, comedy, and reckless abandon. What more can you ask for in a comic? That's the question here. So from number 59, we go to 54 for EC's New Trend Horror Comics by Al Feldstein. So we went over horror comics as well in lecture. And I think that what we said pretty much sums up why this would be on the list. It really pushed the limits of horror. Even in just this picture alone, we see this guy about to kill his wife. This is what the beginning video warned us about, and it was Wortham's greatest fear, but it was graphic, gory, and wasn't afraid to test the limits, which is something to be proud of, I think, and TCJ seems to think so too. And then number 32 is Plastic Man by Jack Cole, and this just seems like a pretty silly comic. I think it seems really entertaining at the same time. It was really stylistic, as TCJ says. He wasn't Batman or Superman that could flower under artistic control. He was just a stylized cartoon superhero. So that's cool to me. I don't know. I don't have too much to say about him, but He looks funny. And then this one took me by surprise as well, number 20, Uncle Scrooge by Carl Barks. It really seems like TCJ has, they're quite big fans of Carl Barks. Couldn't find a review just on Uncle Scrooge though, so here, this one's from Comics Authority. So despite like the hardships that Carl Barks had in life, it seems like a lot like Harvey Kurtzman, he dedicated himself fully to his craft. He really loved what he did, and it showed up in his artwork and in his comics. You know, there are lessons in these tales that children and adults alike need to learn. The same reader at the same time bringing two very important attributes to every reader, young and old alike. They will appreciate him. And here's the familiar face. Up at number 15, we have The Spirit by Will Eisner. I mean, I don't know what more I can say. I think the depiction of Ebony is just so disturbing, but I guess it did represent the time period of, as it says on the bottom here from Wikipedia, both reflected and anticipated the noir outlook of film and fiction in the 1940s. So it was a crime comic that paved the way for a lot of other stuff, I guess. So number 12, as discussed in class, we have the EC Comics War Stories by Harvey Kurtzman. These comics stood out against a lot of the other ones on display. I know there's a lot of text on this screen, but I think the TCJ has a lot to say about this that is important. You know, the fact that he would act out scenes for people. He would go interview veterans, historians, members of foreign consulates. Like, he just committed himself so much. I really like that quote on the bottom as well. Kurtzman considered war the ugliest disease men were cursed with. He believed that if he showed this ugliness to a younger generation, it might find another way to solve its problems. I don't know what he would think. And here we have Kurtzman again. I'm not sure if this counts, Mad Magazine, but I mean, it's on this list, so probably does. The best kind of synopsis general review I could find was from Wikipedia. So it just kind of goes over how big of a risk this was to kind of convert into a magazine, and I think Kurtzman took that risk, and it highly paid off. You know, his dedication, his drawing abilities, definitely pushed it to that next level from my understanding. And yeah, it was so much more successful than anticipated that Unusual Magazine Publishing, it was given a second printing. This is the highest number, number 7. This is our number 1, Donald Duck by Carl Barks. Was not expecting it, but I kind of love it. The TCJ puts it as his work never is dated. They really like Carl Barks, and I don't blame them. I kind of see like a similarity, as I've stated, in like Kurtzman and Carl and Barks, just in their pure dedication to the craft. I'm not sure if that's a presumptuous thing to say. I'm not sure if I'm wrong in that, but it does seem like Donald Duck was influential for its time, and kids and parents alike gathered a lot out of it. And he was tedious. Barks was tedious and serious about these comics, and I respect him a lot more, and I see Donald Duck in a different light than I did before, and I don't know what else you can ask for. So here is just kind of a collage of the comics that I looked at. You know, I can't guarantee these would be their picks on the covers, but they were like the best graphics I could find, so put them all together, and here were my findings. So there were 13 comics that fit my criteria, so just over 10%. 13% grace. Okay, so we had 3 superhero comics, 3 war comics, 2 miscellaneous Kurtzman creations. Mad that I'm pointing it to the bottom there. And then Hey Look, I'm not sure how to designate those. And then there were 3 children's comics, and I'm thinking Scrooge, Donald Duck, and Little Lulu when I say that. 1 horror comic series, the EC comic series there. 1 crime, thinking Spirit. And then there were no romance comics. I know we studied romance comics in class as well. And yeah, I couldn't really find any of that from the Golden Age, at least in the list. So, but there was a lot of other stuff that we looked at. That's kind of all I have to say. I feel like I kind of rushed through it, but those were my findings in the Comic Journal's Top 100 of the 20th century. Thank you so much for a great class. It was nice hearing your voice, seeing you a couple times in office hours, and I think we made the most of it here. Have a great summer, and let's learn a little bit more about the dangers of comic
This one's a
books.
poem. I think you should hear it. The draining rain sprays the pane tenderly. The whistling wind winds round the weeds tenderly. And I come to you with arms out wide and one thought inside of me. So I take your lips, I take your heart tenderly. Maybe you can accept this fact, maybe not. But it is a fact, and I'll prove it to you later in the program. Horror and crime comics upset kids. I'm not talking about any subtle distortion of their emotional makeup. I think that occurs too. But there's a more noticeable, immediate effect. You can see the tension develop as the story gets more gruesome. And if it's a bad one, the kid has a mass of jangled nerves by the time he's through it.